Now imagine you installed Sea of Thieves and just didn't get a ship. What would the game be like? If your only means of transportation are swimming and rowing, you'd assume that there's a lot of stuff you can't actually do. But that isn't the case, and I'm here to prove it, for I've decided I'm going to spend the next 100 days experiencing Sea of Thieves without a ship. And I will show you that you can do pretty much anything this game has to offer without ever setting foot on your own vessel. To that end, I've curated a list of 8 challenges I must complete before the 100 days are over, and if I succeed, you're gonna have to subscribe to my channel. If I fail, well, we're gonna talk about possible punishments later down the line. For now, I was beginning my challenge on day 1, waking up at New Golden Sands. This was a very deliberately chosen spawn location because it makes getting to my first couple of islands a bit easier. So after stuffing my pockets with whatever I could find in random barrels, I used the stationary cannons to fire myself towards my first target, it being Crescent Isle, but not before almost getting eaten off rip. Obviously, my goal was to find a rowboat, but no such luck was bestowed upon me, and as such I continued my journey north to Sea Dog's Rest, though I wouldn't actually find my new vessel until I arrived at Mermaid's Hideaway towards the end of the first day. Yes, most of day 1 was already over, and all I managed to achieve was visit a total of 3 islands. This is going to be a bit of a theme in this challenge, but for now the best thing I could do was prepare for the journey ahead, and what better way to do that than cooking up some grub. Bruh. Are you serious right now? It doesn't get more point blank than this, Rare! Finally. How are these guys so difficult to kill? I didn't know that at the time, but this was the harbinger of bugs I could expect for the next 99 days. Frankly, I'd be wishing that hit-regging on a few pigs was the biggest of my concerns. Either way, I cooked up the meat because cooked food gives me overheal, which is very valuable in a situation where I can't easily restock my supplies. But once I had plundered Mermaid's Hideaway for all of its riches, it was time to head towards my next destination. And it was also time to begin working towards my list of challenges. Since one of those challenges was to visit every part of the map, and the map is split into 4 parts, I basically had to complete 2 of these every 25 days until I get to the Devil's Roar. So for now, I just took any opportunity I could find to collect some coin, because where 1,000,000 gold is absolute child's play to obtain when you have a full-size ship, the same can't be said when stuck on a rowboat. Since I can't put an emissary flag on my rowie, the only kind of multiplier I could benefit from was Gold Rush Hour. Naturally, I scheduled my sessions around that 1-hour window to give me a bit of time to collect treasure in order to sell it for 1.5x its original value. My plan was to chase as many shipwrecks as possible, and it's going to make sense why in a bit. Especially valuable sunken vessels are designated with a red beam in the sky, marking the existence of a Reaper's chest. But because it takes me so long to get, well, anywhere, set marker disappeared before I could get anywhere near it, meaning the shipwreck had likely despawned. The only saving grace was finding a supply crate at Wanderer's Refuge, allowing me to keep a stockpile of food and wood at my disposal. Skeleton captains, and especially their ashen cousins, are going to be another high-value target for me, as the skulls they drop will sell for a lot of money. This one also left me with a key and a map to dig up treasure, which was great because now I had a chest that would allow me to collect multiple items at once, greatly decreasing the time it's going to take me to sell all of my goods. Between that chest, a supply crate, and an ammo box, preparations were basically complete, and I had close to all the functionality of a full-sized vessel on my rowboat. Though as I arrived at the next island, I found myself in company of a sloop. As one does, I decided to sneak around to find the captain of this vessel, and whilst I could not see them, the sound of pistol shots going off was a clear indication for them currently being occupied. I waited for a good opportunity to sneak on their ship, something I'm pretty sure they did not catch me doing. However, one of the skeletons on the island definitely did. Truthfully, I didn't really know what my game plan was at that stage, so when he began sailing away from the island, I kind of panicked. I slid down the ladder and grabbed a black powder keg, hoping that he would see reason. Don't do it, man. Don't do it. This is explosive. Don't do it. Don't do it. This is how it's gonna go. I'm gonna leave you alone, but I will take this with me. Goodbye. Oh, okay. I don't know if this is at all valuable, but I stole something. That's good. Oh, hell yeah, dude. Ashen King's bounty? Jackpot. Now, considering that the pirate I stole this from was very obviously not very experienced, this was about as good a haul as I could expect. And incidentally, I just crossed off my first challenge, stealing something from another pirate. Though that was far from the only boat in the shores of plenty, earlier I was already denied the opportunity to return to New Golden Sands by a galleon, and now, with Gold Rush Hour soon coming to a close, a brigantine was about to hog the next outpost. I decided to kill some time at a nearby shipwreck, but if I can't pawn off my goods in the next 15 minutes, minutes, I will not be able to take advantage of the 1.5x multiplier, and that would make completing the gold challenge a lot more difficult. Now, their ship was still there by the time I was done looting, and I had a bit of a difficult decision to make. Most people just log off without scuttling their boat when they are done for the day, so it was entirely possible that nobody was on the island anymore. But it was also possible that they were still selling, and if 3 people jumped me, yeah, I could say goodbye to my rowboat and everything that was on it. I decided to go for a compromise, hiding my rowie behind the island and then scouting on foot, just to realize that the brigantine had vanished in the minute it took me to row over here. I'm not complaining, this was the only opportunity I had to sell during Gold Rush, and by God, I decided to take it. When day 4 came to a close, all the loot was sold and I was sitting on my first fortune of 128,000 gold pieces. But just because Gold Rush was over does not mean I could relax. I kept at the grind to defeating any skeleton captains I found, completing skeleton camps for orbs of secret, and targeting any red beacon indicating a high value shipwreck. Now, there was a ship battle currently taking place like a square away from this shipwreck, but I wasn't really worried about that because most PvP players just dive to another server once they're done fighting, so I dove down to, at long last, find what I was looking for, a Smugglers shipwreck. Now, these shipwrecks are particularly interesting to me because they carry, as the name implies, smuggler items. The downside of these pieces of treasure is that you can only sell them at designated smuggler hideouts, but the benefit is that they're worth a lot of money with or without Gold Rush. I did make sure to keep an eye out for those ships and their little squabble as I was collecting the loot, but never did I expect either of them to stumble their way towards my neck of the woods. That was until exactly that happened. Now, I will admit that I don't necessarily make the best decisions under pressure. I would lie if I said that I had any sort of plan. All I knew was that I had to get away. And for some reason, these guys were looking for me. Not like they were the only ones, because on my way to the nearest island, I had an entourage of sirens and sharks follow my every move. But one thing I wasn't expecting is the lengths to which they would go in order to find me.
Why? Why are they here? They can't even be stream sniping. I'm not streaming, bro. These dudes are in my walls.
Bruh! They didn't even take the chest! What was all this for? Truly, I could not wrap my head around what these guys were doing and why they were doing it. All I knew is that there was a chance that if they didn't take the Reaper's chest, they may have not taken the smuggler items either, since I could actually still see my rowboat at the shipwreck. So I shot back on over once the coast was clear just to find my entire rowboat completely picked clean. All the supplies, all the utility items, and all the treasure was gone. The only things left were the loot pieces still inside the shipwreck, since they didn't seem to have gone down to it themselves. But the scraps I was left with were a far cry from all the actually valuable items that were taken from me. Nothing really noteworthy ended up happening for the last few days of my session. I continued collecting treasure and eventually sold all of my smuggler items at Crescent Isle, with the rest of my loot getting pawned off at New Golden Sands. By the way, some people get confused when I call this outpost by its actual name, but look, the name is right there on the gate. Day 9 came to a close with me having collected a total of 180,000 gold pieces, so I wasn't too worried about being able to complete the money challenge. As for the others, well, that's another story entirely. Waking up in the early hours of day 10, the shipwright must have given my rowboat a bit of a makeover last night. To match that drip, I figured now was as good a time as any to bestow that same honor upon my new pirate. Ladies and gentlemen, you probably heard of Cliff the Story Guy, you may have heard of Alleged the Tale Dude, and you might have even seen the recent struggles of Precipice the Narrative Land. Now allow me to introduce you to Ronald, the rowboat guy. But that trip was not the only thing I spent money on, for I decided to invest into some supply crates off rip. But don't worry, there was a shipwreck literally right next to the outpost, and I may have gotten up a bit too late that day, so Gold Rush was already on. All I'm trying to say is that I made that money back within the first hour of my session. But because I was so up good on money, I figured I'd like to spend some time testing out money-making methods that are a bit less risky, I suppose. I really didn't enjoy getting my entire loot stack stolen whilst diving down to that shipwreck last session, so I figured I'd try out the one and only true pacifist way of making gold. Fishing. Yup, I actually spent the entire second session fishing as much as humanly possible to see if I could complete my gold challenge without constantly having to chase shipwrecks. Remembering along the way that, and you may not know this if you haven't spent a degenerate amount of time on a rowboat like me, loot actually despawns on your rowie. That's right, you better make sure you touch your treasure at least once every hour or it will simply be taken away by the rare gods in the sky. Other than that, it really was just fishing for like 10 days straight, plus the occasional adjacent loot pick pick up. And how much money did I make? About 21,000 gold. So yeah, that ain't it, chief. I laid down for a quick nap on day 20, knowing that the next 10 days ahead are going to have to make up for that wasted time. Though I was actually awoken by the sound of another boat pulling up to the port. Naturally, I decided to hide and wait for them to log out before setting off myself, but I did help myself to the emissary flag they left behind. That's plus 4,000 gold right there, buddy. But day 25 was fast approaching, and with it came moving day. That's right, I'd have to leave the comfort of my beloved shores of plenty and get ready to move onto the ancient isles, featuring a cannon attachment the shipwright gifted to me whilst I was sleeping. With that said, I still had not settled on a better gold farm than what I was already doing between the skeleton camps for orbs of secrets and picking up random trash on the beaches whilst waiting for new shipwrecks to spawn. When a storm came my way, I did decide to give fishing one last try because I knew that stormfish were more valuable than the pondies I'd fished up before, but that went about as well as you'd imagine it did. Oh my god, bruh! Go away! I finally get a stormfish and I get interrupted by stupid phantoms, bruh. Yeah, fishing was still not it. In the entire in-game day that I spent in this storm, I'd only collected 2 stormfish, and those were not exactly valuable enough to warrant the trouble. The only thing I could come up with that would be safer than the shipwrecks, featuring massive glowing beacons in the sky, were sunken treasuries. Incidentally, those are safer to complete on a rowboat than a full-sized vessel because they do necessitate you leaving your ride behind, making it vulnerable to other pirates. But without a mast sticking over the horizon, I felt pretty safe down there. Now, unfortunately for me, this was not actually a treasury, which would be a wave-based combat encounter, but a shrine. Shrines are basically underwater puzzle boxes, and I'm not exactly known to be good at puzzles, so I spent like a day and a half down there for absolute poverty amounts of loot just to have to fight my way through sharks to get back to my rowboat to then, at last, talk to the wrong mermaid. Yeah, in order to claim the treasure from the shrines, you have to deposit them at a mermaid statue and then claim it again up top by talking to a mermaid. Unfortunately, I talked to the wrong mermaid, the one that sends you back to your boat. I did decide to use my sloop to get back to where I left off because this was just like an honest-to-God mistake that if I wasn't actually given a boat, couldn't have happened. But when I arrived at the shrine, the rowboat had despawned, so now I was stranded in the middle of the ocean without a ride. Also, I really hope you enjoy the pop-up at the bottom of the screen because that is absolutely not going away until I claim the treasure, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. In fact, I didn't even manage to find a rowboat until the butt end of day 26, at which point I'd completely lost orientation of my surroundings because I just spent almost 2 in-game days, close to an hour of my actual real life swimming between islands. The only, and I mean only saving grace was that the next shipwreck I found was one of the Smugglers variety, bestowing upon me not only a load of supplies but also a load of treasure for my troubles. Now there is one problem though, as you may have just realized, I do not know my way around the ancient isles. If it ain't the Shores of Plenty or Devil's Roar, I'm basically about as navigationally challenged as somebody who just installed the game. And the problem with that was that Gold Rush had already begun, meaning I was running out of time. I could tell by the fleet symbol in the sky that this is where the center of the map was, since that world event can only spawn at the same location every time, but that was about it. I actually resigned to my fate of not being able to make use of Gold Rush for my big Smugglers loot stack and decided to go for a nearby outpost to at least sell my non-smuggler items. By the time I arrived, there were 34 minutes left of Gold Rush, and all I could do was sell whatever items these NPCs would take from me. That is, until a miracle happened. Wait. Hello? Hey, do you have a microphone? So my boat sank and I got all the smuggler stuff and I don't know where the smugglers hideout is. Can you show me?
Yeah, come.
I got like 32 minutes for Gold Rush and I really need the money, you know? This was unbelievably lucky. My new friend over here, whilst being a friend of few words, agreed to escort me to the nearest hideout. And at the same time, this would allow me to scratch off another challenge off my list, hitching a ride with another crew. So a lot of these challenges were designed not just to give me stuff to do, but also to make sure I couldn't simply sit in one part of the map and avoid players for the entire duration of my 100 days. I wasn't entirely convinced that bro over here was not going to stab me in the back and take all my stuff, especially when his friend joined the party who looked like he was one mild inconvenience away from having his Joker moment. But they actually did just drop me off at Crook's Hollow and left basically immediately so that I could sell my stuff in peace. A process that would take a huge chunk out of my 24-minute time window because there are a bunch of traps between me and the NPC who buys the loot off of me, so just to play it safe, I figured I'd rather relay the loot between the activation platforms to make sure I never run the risk of dying to either of them. And after this struggle that was this session after the mermaid incident, the days of swimming, the days of aimlessly rowing, and the days of AI enemies trying to ruin my day. This was catharsis. 19.5, hell yeah. Dude, I needed this so bad. We're finally on course again, yes. And we're not even done selling everything yet. Truly, this was a victory my mental could have not gone without. I know to you guys this doesn't look like much. I mean, I'm cutting most of the tedious parts out of the video, right? But every in-game day is 24 actual minutes in real life. So whenever I cut between clips and you see 2 days have passed, I just spend almost an actual hour of my life doing nothing but rowing. Or more appropriately for that session, swimming. But thanks to the help of those kind strangers, I was back on track to making my million goal by day 100. Something I was so thankful for that I really wanted to pay it forward. I returned to Plunder Outpost where another ship was already waiting and offered them whatever non-smuggle loot was left, but he kindly declined the offer. So I did what any reasonable person would. I waited until a new ship arrived to bestow upon them any and all supplies I'd collected on my journey. Is this just an excuse to not have to spend the rest of my session rowing so I could avoid repetitive strain injury? Maybe, but it was worth it because at the crack of day 30, somebody did show up and they seemed very thankful for me dropping them all of my supplies. This session was over, allowing me to take a well-deserved break, but little did I know that when it came to being unlucky, I really hadn't experienced the worst of it just yet. Alright, at this point I think you kind of get my routine. I row my boat, skelly my ton, wreck the ships, and collect as much loot as possible to stay on track for my 1 million goal by day 100. And that's all fine and good if making that million was the only challenge left on the list, but it isn't. You see, one of the more difficult tasks I have to complete is finishing a world event, and that wouldn't really be that big of a deal, wasn't it for the fact that every event I come across is either already occupied or a naval one. I don't think I need to explain to you why fighting a burning blade on a rowboat is difficult, but because I need to stuff exposition over this footage, I'm going to do it anyway. Despite popular belief, it's not actually a lack of firepower that stops me from sinking this boat. I picked up some gunpowder from a nearby sea fortress for that exact purpose. It's the fact that NPC vessels literally don't even acknowledge me as an entity in the game. If I was on a cannon rowboat, these guys would be turning me to Swiss cheese, but because I lost it, the burning blade literally just circled around aimlessly for eternity. I did have the idea of putting the keg in its path, but I swear that boat is not being controlled by AI, but a developer making sure I don't get to sink it. The next best thing I could do was try to dock my rowboat, something I was not sure is even possible on an uncontrolled burning blade, until I actually got the pop-up. Now, docking your rowboat on a vessel that does not even acknowledge your existence is a lot more difficult than you'd imagine, not only because the window for that prompt appearing is extremely small, but also because my rowboat takes damage every time I row into it. But rowing into its path was the only way to assure I even get the chance to try it, and after many a failed attempt, by the tail end of day 41, I finally got on. There's only one problem. Now, the crappy thing is I don't have a way to sink it. I know. Guess I'm just gonna kind of see where this leads me, because I have no idea what else to do. There's no other world event. And that really was the crux of my predicament. Usually in Sea of Thieves, if you don't like a world event, you can simply use the diving function to get onto a different server until you find one you actually want to complete. But because my rowboat does not have a quest table attached to it, it also does not have access to diving, meaning whatever event is on my server is what I'm going to have to contend with. And in this case, that means sitting on a burning blade for hours on end, hoping somebody's going to come around so I can help them sink it. So until that happens, all I could do was sit in the crow's nest as the whims of the burning blade took me across the seas. Bro, at one point the thing literally attacked a naked sloop at an outpost. This AI is somehow even more toxic than actual players. But at the tail end of day 43, my suffering would finally come to an end, for a whole-ass brigantine was about to take on the event. Until they too got absolutely steamrolled and decided to bail out. The really bad news? A sloop was joining the fray. What, you think this is a good thing for me? Well, allow me to prove you wrong in form of a profanity warning. This does not look like the kind of boat that's currently being captained by anyone. Yep. Sure is not. Hey, what's up, man? Don't do it. Don't do it. I need this completion. I need this completion so bad, bro. No, stop, 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 stop. Quiet, 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 stop, stop, stop. Oh, shoot! God damn it, you guys! My damn rowboat is gone! Fuck! Yeah, I was an extremely unhappy camper, especially because the island I spawned at did not house a rowboat, meaning there was even more swimming in my immediate future just to find a new vessel. Now, trust me when I say that I was not done with this world event yet, and even though it only took me 1 day to get back to the Burning Blade, that's all it took for it to have become player-controlled. And that's a problem, because if I can't sink an AI-controlled Burning Blade, what chance do I have to rip it from the sweaty grasp of actual pirates? There was literally nothing I could do to even catch up to them, let alone participate in the fight, so frustratingly, I had no choice but to end my session in the late hours of day 49, having achieved absolutely nothing. And things weren't going to get easier because come day 50, it was time to move once again. I had exhausted the entirety of my 25-day budget in the Ancient Isles without completing my world event challenge. If the same thing happens in the wilds, I can kiss my chances of succeeding goodbye because there are no world events that spawn in the Devil's Roar, and that's where I'm headed in another 25 short days. To make matters worse, the only events I ever spotted were naval events. Naturally, I was in a bit of a rush, which makes it ever the more convenient that this happened. Okay, we have a problem. I don't know how I managed to do this, but if I get off the rowboat right now, I will black screen. And if I black screen, my rowboat is gone. Yeah, the storm kind of pushed me down here as I was trying to row out, and I can't get out now. It just kind of like moves me arbitrarily as well. I can get further into the dock for some reason. I don't know that this storm can dislodge me on its own. But I'm very concerned right now. Okay, the only way to avoid getting black screened, maybe, is when the storm destroys my rowboat. I did not foresee this to be a problem. Of all the things that could have been a problem. If I mesh into the dock enough, it might just eject me. Oh. Oh my, okay, I can now see how I got down here. Oh my god. Oh, the ladder's not real. Oh, thank the Lord for weird coding. Holy crap. Granted, weird codings what got me into that in the first place, but at least I was out now. After that absolute shit show of a mess that I just barely managed to free myself from, I happened to run into an ancient megalodon. I figured that maybe I can attach myself to it via harpoon to cover some distance, which did actually work, but then I noticed that the harpoon attaching created the same kind of effect as when you deal damage to it, prompting the question, is this dealing damage to it? Does this count as dealing damage to it? Oh no! No! No, I broke my rowboat! Oh my god!
I didn't know that breaks my rowboat!
Needless to say that I was not having a great time. At least I managed to find another rowboat 1 island over, together with the 1 entire skull's worth of loot, but I soon realized that I was fighting with the same issue I had in the Ancient Isles, it being orientation. I kid you not, I actually went out of my way to go to a sea fortress just to be able to take a look at the map so that I could figure out where to go. But even with a map right in front of me, I'd absolutely no idea where I could make some money whilst helplessly waiting for somebody to complete that fleet so that a new event could spawn. But that never happened. For some reason, despite this being a pirate game, naval events are among the least popular ones in Sea of Thieves. For like 50 days straight across 5 different sessions, nobody ever completed that Fleet of Fortune on any of the servers that I was on. Meaning, I had to take matters into my own hands. Now, there is a big problem with the idea of me taking on that fleet myself. I can't actually start the event. PvE content in this game scales according to the number of players and or ships within range, but because this is a naval event, it won't even start until an actual full-sized vessel enters its designated area. Mind you, this fleet has been on the server for over 2 hours without anyone activating it. I have no idea how in the world this has not despawned on its own yet to make way for another event. Alas, I was there now, and the only thing I could do was hope that what hadn't happened for the past 4 days will somehow magically happen today. And I was waiting for a really long time, you guys. One thing breaking the monotony was flipping my loot to make sure it doesn't despawn, but other than that, it really was just a waiting simulator. And for that time, the only thing I could spot on the horizon was these absolute legends that give me actual real-life money to call themselves members of my channel. You too can become part of the crew simply by clicking the join join button down below. Speaking of which, it's time to talk about punishments in case I fail this challenge. If I don't succeed in beating all of my challenges by day 100, you guys will get to choose my punishment. You can suggest a challenge down in the comment section below, and I'm going to pick somewhere between 3 to 5 of the most upvoted ones to then put them to a final vote in front of my members. By the way, there's only like 10 paid members on my channel at the time of making this video, so these guys are going to have a lot of sway over the result of this. But even if you can't or simply don't want to give me money, that's totally fine. Just make sure you upvote whatever comment you think could make for a fun challenge. Something like blowing up the gold hoarder with black powder kegs, spending 10 hours fishing to find out how much I can catch, or banishing me for 100 days into the Devil's Roar. As long as I can see it actually being possible, I will consider it. What I didn't see being possible was me completing this fleet, at least until I finally spotted a speck of hope. Oh, somebody finally spawned it in! I've waited hours! I did not believe it would happen. Oh my god, it finally spawned. No, they're sailing out again. Please, please come back. They're gonna despawn without you here. Oh no. No, there was nothing left to do but to do it. Skeleton ships are a bit fickle when it comes to whether or not they want to exist on this mortal plane, so I had to rush on over and then take them out before they remembered that disappearing was an option. And this really was not easy. The mobile cannons that I strapped to my rowboat barely had any degree of sway, and every wave under my rowboat made aiming feel impossibly difficult. Not to mention that every time after I took 3 shots in a row, I had to dismount and switch cannons because any more than that could cause them to explode. Now, I did have plenty of cannonballs in reserve. The challenge was putting myself in a position to actually be able to use them. Between the waves, the lack of mobility, the limit to how many shots I can take in a row, and the fact that these ships had no obligation to stay anywhere near me, this ended up a lot more difficult than I had hoped. Difficult, but not impossible. And that's all I needed. It is worth mentioning that these cannons of rage are not technically supposed to be deployable on a rowboat. There's like a really specific angle you can place them at to trick the game into thinking they're on a solid enough platform to be used. So their usability is definitely limited, but it was good enough for me to keep pounding lead into their hulls. And just before the dawn of day 59, the first vessel was sunk, leaving only one more to defeat. The galleon, mind you, but if it bleeds, it can die. And not much later, I successfully managed to take it down. Oh! Oh my god, I sank it! I sank it, I sank it, I sank it! Oh, the sound. I don't think I was ever that happy to hear the sound of a sinking enemy ship. Words cannot describe how incredibly tedious it was to get this done. But numbers can. 6 out of 7. There's only one problem. That was not the boss. Yeah, this was just a basic ass wave, and there's like 2 of these before the final galleon even shows up. And some of you might have had a look at the day counter. My session was pretty much over. At that stage, I kind of saw that as a proof of concept. I knew that I can complete the event. All I needed was somebody nearby to spawn the waves for me, something I was determined to attempt on my next session. For now, I wedged my harpoon rowboat into the tent at the Reaper's hideout to sell all of my treasure, clocking my net worth at a total of 635,000 gold. I painstakingly removed my vessel from the premises once more and then used the rest of my session to row back to the wilds in order to end my day. But then something unexpected happened. I'm gonna have to break the fourth wall here for a second. I know I always show my character falling asleep at the tavern so that it makes sense for me to wake up there, but in actuality, I sleep on the roof. And whilst I was taking my nap, something, or more accurately, someone, had awoken me. I hadn't logged out of the game just yet, instead merely taking a lunch break, but this was an opportunity I could not pass up on. At first, this brigantine crew was completely and utterly ignoring me. For a second, I was thinking that maybe these guys are NPCs, because just like the actual NPC vessels, they did not acknowledge my existence. But eventually, I did make myself known, and I was able to have a conversation with them.
Hello, man.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, hello.
Could I ask for your help, or are you done playing for today?
We're not done. What do you need help with?
Okay, I have my boat on the other side. It's a rowboat. Could you drop me off at the world event? So, the problem is the last boss does not spawn until a real boat arrives. So I just need you guys to like sail into it and then leave me to complete it. You can have the loot if you want. I just need the completion.
Yeah, we can help you.
Yo, thank you, man. I'll bring my rowboat around. Now, I don't know if you guys can tell just how bloody hard I was trying not to sound desperate, but reality is, I was very desperate. Them agreeing to help me was the kind of 1 in a million opportunity I could not allow myself to miss. I have to complete a world event before my time in the wild runs out, and this was my one and only chance to make that happen. So once we arrived back at the arena, there was only one thing left to say. Alright, thank you, gamers. I'll see you in Valhalla. It was game time. At that stage, I kind of figured this whole thing out. I was low-key getting kind of good at using my scuffed setup with the utmost level of efficiency, allowing me to defeat this wave in as little as 1 in-game day. Naturally, that left me with the same problem I had before, in that I cannot make the boss wave spawn, and I was ready to waste even more hours of my life waiting for that to happen. But it is with a massive grin on my face that I can tell you it only took 2 days. Now, the funny thing was that I was literally AFK when these guys showed up. I was definitely not playing a mobile game with second monitor or anything, and that's a bit of a bummer because having a ship help me would greatly decrease the time it'd take me to complete my challenge. But when I made my way over to the last ship, I heard somebody fighting on board of it. Whoever just sank that boat was still on there trying to get revenge, and I mean, who am I to deny them that? I happily finished what they started and even offered this dude some of my supplies to recover. In turn, he voluntarily agreed to let me have all the treasure from that event. Granted, this isn't why I completed it, but I was not gonna say no to some free loot. But you know who else would not say no to some free loot? That's Loop over there. Uh-oh, I'm so screwed. Hey, stop! Whoa, what the hell? Bro, what the hell was that for? Hey, stop. Stop. This was a certified code red, my friends. I had to somehow break line of sight to that sloop if I wanted to have any chance of getting away, but I was also aware of the fact that the loot on my rowboat was worth going through a lot of trouble for. To them, anyway. I ditched that chest of fortune faster than your dad did when he said he was just gonna go get some milk. I was perfectly on track to hit 1 million anyway, but I still had 6 days left in the session, and I was not about to be stuck in swimming purgatory again just to find a new rowboat. Truthfully, I had absolutely no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to build distance. It appeared that the 2 sloops were fighting over that chest of fortune I dropped, which was just as well because that gave me the opportunity I needed to sneakily stealth away. Once I was several islands away, I did take a second to marvel upon all the goodies I got away with, and gamers, it was a heck of a lot. Frankly, I could still not believe my luck. I mean, okay, lucky in the context of spending like 6 real-life hours of your day to complete 1 world event in a video game for a character that isn't even your main might be relative, but to me, this was a really big deal. I did spend the next day just kind of staying under the radar. Only an idiot would spend the money they just stole from a bank mere hours ago, and I really wanted to make sure they would not be waiting for me at an outpost. And it's not like there wasn't anything for me to do, but once the coast was clear, I returned to my home base at Daggertooth Outpost to finally pawn off my goodies. I would have much rather been at the Reaper's hideout, but with it being right next to where the fleet spawned, it seemed too obvious of a target. Though in hindsight, I really should have done that anyway, because in the midst of me selling my loot, a brand new vessel had spawned at the outpost. I was trying to bribe my way out of that situation, but to no avail. Bro literally didn't even say a word to me. Why do PvP players in this game have the personality of a stale piece of bread? Anyway, I still got away with about 50,000 gold worth of loot, and why is it day 60 nice? Okay, quick update because my hard drive ran out of space. The last few days, all I've done is go from the Shores of Plenty, which is where I spawned for some reason, back to the wilds, where I just did the usual Orb of Secret and shipwreck stuff. So our tally now is 710,000 by day 60 nice. And yeah. I'll see you guys in day 70, where it's once again moving day. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on the home stretch. Having finished both my complete a world event and sink a boat challenges in the wilds, we can officially scratch off and visit every part of the map as well, simply by entering the Devil's Roar. That only leaves a handful of challenges left to do and the whole 30 days to complete them. The first thing I wanted to get out of the way was finally making that 1 million gold. Throughout the last 70 days, I really wasn't worried about whether or not I could complete this because the Devil's Roar has just absolutely insane money-making potential. Right now, I was in the midst of completing one of the latest additions, the Ashen Garrisons. Basically, kind of a mix of wave-based combat and mini puzzles, culminating in the opening of an actual vault. Yeah, no, I'm not talking about a stinky wooden door that the NPCs call a vault. I mean an actual vault, like how you would imagine them to look. The biggest downside to this was that moving the treasure to my getaway vehicle, which also conveniently spawned inside the garrison prior to my arrival, takes longer than completing the actual content, at least if you know what you're doing. But once that was done, all I had to do was find a couple of pulleys in order to open the gates to freedom. It was only day 71 and I already felt extremely confident in being able to get 1,000,000 far ahead of the end of my challenge, especially because the biggest moneymaker was yet to come, the Eternal Guard. Frankly, this is a massively underrated gold farm if you ask me. Now, this is not the first time I'm relying on this piece of content to carry my bank account, but it's also not the first time that this happened. Oh, come, are you serious? I just started, bro. I literally saw this volcano erupt minutes ago before I arrived. Can we talk about how annoying it is that I can't control my character? During an earthquake? Oh yeah, cool. Just spawn more AI enemies. Not like I'm under enough stress already. Thanks, Rare. I may have not considered how much of a hindrance volcanoes are going to be during my stay in the Roar. It actually takes a considerable amount of time to get out of being sent back to the lobby range when using a boat of the rowing variety, so even if it was just an earthquake without an eruption, I could not take the risk of finding out. I immediately realized that this was going to cost me a lot of time, so the sooner I could get to 1,000,000, the better. Unfortunately, the game had different plans. Oh, no! Oh my god! Are you serious? Nothing quite like getting stuck in a tree and then being almost one-shot. I can't off myself. Why is this even a thing? Why does this keep happening to me? Somebody please make it so that volcanoes rage baiting me is the biggest of my problems again. Ultimately, death really was the only way to free myself from that prison, and you're not gonna believe it, I spawned at Thieves Haven. If the game tried to put me as far from where I died as possible, there really wouldn't have been many other options, you guys. Now, because I just died due to an absolute bullshit bug, I did give myself the freedom of taking my ship back to the Roar, but I wouldn't stop the timer as to simulate the time it would have taken me to swim back to Fetcher's Rest had I spawned at the correct area. Oh yeah, you guys might not know this, but if you die in the Roar, the game is supposed to spawn you back in the Roar, and for some reason it just didn't. Naturally, my rowboat had despawned, because of course it did, but because I was right next to an island, the items that were on it could still be salvaged due to the longer despawn time they get when not in the open sea. Speaking of despawning, of course the Eternal Guard was not here anymore either, and if you think that the game would bestow a replacement rowboat upon me, you're dreaming. The best idea I had was trying to hide my loot behind a rock before swimming back to the garrison, seeing as how those things are supposed to have a rowboat next to the vault. So I climbed the wall, hoping not to slip on black screen, completed the gauntlet outside, defeated the skeletons inside, and was met with a horrifying realization that whilst everything in this entire place had respawned, the rowboat didn't. Like seriously, the enemies, the traps, the loot, the puzzles, and even the supplies inside the barrels had all been reset, but the one thing missing was the same thing I came here to get. Guys, I swear this challenge was making me lose my mind. The only saving grace was that I could use one of the stationary cannons to accelerate my travel back to Fetcher's Rest, where I flipped the loot to stop it from despawning before deploying my cannon of rage to do it all over again. I only managed to find a rowboat on the tail end of day 73 and successfully returned to my loot stash in the early hours of day 74. At this stage, I made the decision to only load up the highest value items onto my rowboat because I didn't want to be in a situation again where it takes me so long to sell my stuff that another ship can spawn on me. Also, we're not going to talk about the fact that the game had spawned a brand new harpoon rowboat at Fetcher's Rest only after I left the island for a third time. But I did return to the garrison in order to pick up, once again, only the highest value items, and guess what? Yup, that's right! Rowboat respawned here as well! At least now I knew where I could go in case of another incident, but for now, I just loaded up the goods and fled the premises before the game found another creative way to send me back to the lobby. Needless to say that only 5 days into my time here, I was absolutely sick and tired of the Devil's Roar. Thankfully, I had a good reason to leave. The garrisons gave me a couple of items that could only be sold at the Reaper's hideout. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'd literally rather be rowing halfway across the map than spending even just one more day in this godforsaken area. Though I did plunder a shipwreck at the very edge of it because, I mean, it's free money. Technically, I was supposed to sell that stuff at a Smugglers hideout in the Roar, but that felt kind of stupid considering I'd have to go east anyway anyway in order to get to the other hideout. So I just pawned it off at Crook's Hollow on my way to Reapers. Money check at 835,000 before employing my harpoon rowboat strategy once more to start day 78 with 905,000 shiny pieces of gold. Oh yeah, I had to waste like a day and a half waiting on a random rock in the middle of the ocean because another crew was occupying the Reaper's hideout. And this is definitely not in the spirit of the challenge because this shipwreck is nowhere near the Devil's Roar, but I still decided to loot it just so I could finish my gold grind on day 79 during gold rush hour with a whopping 1,028,423 gold to my name, allowing me to use the remaining 21 days to finish my last challenges. Recruit another pirate and complete a tall tale. Now there are a few tall tales in the row that would have been absolute child's play for me to complete on a rowboat, but I wanted to do something grand. I wanted to row to the shores of Golds. And I didn't want to do that alone, so for the next couple of days I just sat at Mora's Peak in hopes of being able to find a crew willing to go on that adventure. And gamers, I may have found one such individual.
We know that you're there.
I'm on the rooftop.
Why are you afraid of us?
I'm not afraid, I've been waiting for somebody. Are you busy right now? Like, are you doing something?
Oh, my friend will leave soon, so I will be alone.
I was asking if you were down for an adventure with me and my humble vessel.
Nice.
I'm planning to go to the shores of gold and I'm trying to
Nice
recruit a
one.
crew for that.
Where are you in this quest?
The last one.
Oh, come with me. I can come with you if you want.
On the rowboat? Are you sure you want to join?
Yes, I said yes.
Honestly, I was kind of perplexed over how easy it was to convince him. I mean, bro basically invited himself to the party, but that's exactly the kind of energy I was looking for. Now, some of you might be wondering how I was planning on starting a tall tale if I didn't even have a quest table, and that's a very easy problem to solve. I just go to the tall tale. Yeah, sometimes people forget that the quest table on your boat is a convenience feature added years into the game's lifespan. Every tall tale in the game can be started by interacting with its opening quest in the world, and that's exactly what the two of us did before heading north towards the shores of Golds. Seeing as how we had a long journey ahead of us, I was trying my darndest to keep my friend over here entertained through conversation so that he doesn't get bored and leaves. But it didn't seem like he really minded at all. Sometimes I felt like he was even more excited about this whole thing than I was. Seriously, I think all of us could learn something from this dude. Sometimes just say yes to a really stupid idea and see where it goes. Chances are you'll get a great story out of it. I'm like turning into the yes theory of Sea of Thieves with that one. Now I know for a fact that full-sized vessels not equipped with a shroud breaker will take unavoidable damage in the waters that surround the shores of Gold, but I had no idea how that would work on my rowboat, which cannot hold that item. And as the waters turned red with the blood of the fallen, I started to get increasingly more worried. Our rowboat was holding up just fine, and we could even see the mountains of Tribute Peak closing in, but there was a feeling at the back of my mind that things were just going a bit too smoothly. I believe in the power of friendship.
That's my boy.
Hell yeah. I'm surprised the rowboat is not taking damage.
Yeah.
It's fine, right? Oh no! No! What did I do? Hey, remember when I said that the game couldn't have spawned me even further away if it tried? Yeah, what about the literal opposite end of the map? No, this was a really tricky situation because I was not entirely sure what just happened. I black screened at the exact moment I had gotten off the rowboat to check for damage, so I was not sure if I got teleported due to a bug or if the rowboat being so deep in the Red Sea without taking damage was a bug. So because I couldn't clearly identify this being Rare's fault, I didn't feel like it was fair for me to sail back on my ship. Meaning, I had to row the entire distance from Discovery Ridge all the way back to Tribute Peak. Just in case you ever wondered how long it would take to cover the entire distance of this game's map diagonally in a rowboat, it took me like 2 in-game days, so about 48 minutes, with me getting lost only twice. But much to my shock and disgust, this time the rowboat couldn't even survive getting into the Red Sea. Every time I got within range, I randomly started taking so much damage that it was impossible for me to keep my rowboat repaired, let alone also cover any distance with it. And no matter how much I tried, it just wouldn't work. Even when I tried to just get as close as possible to then swim the rest of the way, I got an entire army's worth of sharks on my tail, making the journey literally impossible. And trust me, I really did keep trying until the very end. Now you might wonder why I didn't just pick another tall tale that takes place somewhere I could actually access, and that is because day 99 is not when I failed the challenge. Actually, it was on day 70. You see, at the start of the video, I proclaimed that you could do anything this game has to offer without ever setting foot on your ship. But on day 70, before beginning my session, I was trying to see if it was even possible to start a tour tale without using your quest table, and the answer is, you guessed it, you couldn't. Because whilst I could start the tour tale anywhere these quests begin, to even be granted access to that privilege, I needed to complete the tutorial. And that tutorial can only be started, as you can imagine, on your ship. I really thought I could cheese the system and at least give you guys an epic Shores of Gold finale, but the game unfortunately had different plans. Meaning, now it is up to you. Leave a comment down below to upvote other comments proposing a future challenge I should do as a punishment for failing this one. Remember, keep it reasonable, else it's not going to go up for voting in front of my members. But while you're down there, what about you drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed this video, and check out an equally painful challenge run in which I attempted to get to Pirate Legend without fighting. You can find a code on screen right now. But until then, thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you guys have a day filled with riches on the sea. And until next time, peace.